Hello, welcome to Rachel's studio, and since it's the year of the rabbit, I thought this would be a fun little tutorial to put out, and also it's a great little taste of what my full-length, in-depth voiceover tutorials are like on Patreon. I bet you all get sick of hearing about Patreon, and I hope to get this channel to the point where I can offer all my content free. But right now, I make under $200 a month in AdSense working full-time, so I'm hoping in the next year or so to get more sponsorships and grow my income so everything is much more sustainable. But until then, all my videos are in fact sponsored by my Patreon. And thank you so much to those of you who support me on Patreon. And even if you support me at the $3 a month level, which is less than a cup of coffee these days, it really helps me out. And I share a lot of content, even with my $3 members. So if you want to give me a little love, come join me over there. If you join for a year, you get 2 months free and access to up to over 100 tutorials, depending on what tier you join. But let's make like a bunny and jump into this fun little study I did on Arches cold press paper. I've been doing a little test to see if I liked using Arches resized, because half the time I use Arches these days, the sizing is bad. I found out you can use watercolor ground to resize paper, so I gave it a go and was trying to paint the same little bunny twice, once on regular Arches and once on resized Arches. From this test, and I probably need to do more tests, I like Arches without the sizing better. I got lucky with this bunny because this Arches had no sizing issues and it was a dream to paint on, and I felt it was worthy to show to the rest of the world. By the way, this bunny muse came to me through the Facebook group Rabbit Lovers, and the owner, Kaylee Schmidt, kindly allowed me to borrow her muse. I painted this in about a 3x4 inch format just as a study. Also, all my supplies are listed in the description, and I always appreciate it when you use my affiliate links. I would love it if you shared your painting on social media and tagged me, and I'd love it even more if you joined my free Facebook group and posted your paintings there. You're welcome to sell your bunny painting, but I just ask that you don't make prints and give credit to me and Kaylee for her reference. I use the same 10 colors in this bunny that I use in all my paintings, so be sure to check out my video I made about what those colors are and why I cannot live without them, and I'll link that here. And know that if you click on those, they will just queue up for you to watch later and not take you out of this video. So we'll start wet on dry, which means that the paper is dry, and I'm painting with milk consistency paint. If you missed the series I just finished where I took a deep dive into all the different techniques you can paint with milk consistency, tea consistency, and cream consistency, be sure to check that out, and I'll link that here. So here you'll see me picking up M-Gram Naphthol Red Milk Consistency with my size 6 round silver black velvet brush. I start with pure red and then mix in some yellow about milk consistency. I often want a whole area one value, which is mediums, lights, and darks, but I try to keep my colors changing. And I forget to do that all the time, but if I was a really super good little artist, I would do that a lot better. Because the ears have such a strong shape with little softness, I want to let them dry before I put on the black edges, and I paint them wet on dry so they retain their edges. I'm not trying to get my famous furred out edges that a lot of you join my Patreon and join my channel to learn how to do. But anyway, so while I let them dry a bit, I'll paint a blue underpainting of French ultramarine on dry paper with milk consistency, and then quickly go in and swish around it with a brush full of clear, clean water to attach that blue into the background and just give it a little bit of artistic energy. Notice that I also use the side of my brush in a fast, swishy motion to get a dry brush effect. Cleaning out my brush. By the way, that's a silver black velvet 6 round, and scrubbing with the heel of my brush around that edge and attaching that color, attaching the bunny into the painting with a fast dry brush technique that I talked about so much in my tea consistency video I just put out. So I'm softening those edges while everything's still wet. Then the bunny's nose was red leaning, so I painted the whole end of his face red basically, because like I said, I'm not trying to put dabs of color, I'm trying to put blocks of color. And then I paint the blue right next to it and let the two colors merge together for a soft, dreamy look. And then I go in with thick cream consistency, ultramarine blue. I float it in while everything's still wet, so everything stays soft, but I get a lot darker color because this is a black bunny after all. Then I'm going to go in with some very thick cream consistency paint. Notice I'm just dipping the tip of my brush into that black paint and really scrubbing it around to get thick cream consistency paint. And I find even if your paper is quite wet, if you go in with very thick cream consistency paint, that paint will bloom out softly like you want in fur, but it will also somewhat hold its shape that you painted in. It won't bloom out to a blob unless your paper is way too wet, which you very rarely want puddles on your paper anyway. And then I blended all the edges a little bit with clean, clear water where you see it lighter. Again, this is cream consistency paint. You can tell by how rich it looks. And you can tell I'm painting on wet paper because it blooms out at the edges. And then as long as I keep my brush moving and don't lift it up, I can get this thin little line. Now, if I lifted my brush up in the middle of that stroke, it would bloom out and explode at the end of my brush. So just remember, if you want a long, thin, soft line on painted wet on wet, if you keep your brush moving and your paper is not too wet, it'll hold that line like what I just did. But as it dries, you'll see that lightens up quite a bit, and I'll have to repaint in the little bunny nose edge. Here, I want to get an interesting edge. I like to have a variety of edges, some wet on dry edges, some wet on wet, some disappearing edges. So here I'm using the side of my brush with a dry brush technique using cream consistency, Daniel Smith, lamp black with the side of my bristles and kind of scrubbing on these edges because I want an interesting edge. And I'm also going to try to keep in mind my windmill, Rembrandt windmill principle. If you have not watched that video, you have got to watch that. I will link it here. Do not miss that video. It is life-changing for me. I'm not even kidding. But I wanted a light on dark edge, so that's why I kept the back side of the bunny white. Even though this is a black bunny, I was experimenting with that idea. I've been thinking about that a lot with black animals. How do you get that light on dark edge? And the windmill principle, real quick, says have 4 pairings of values between the background and the main subject, or subjects within a painting like a tree. Have light on light, dark on light, light on dark, and light on light. Light background against light part of the bunny. And on the forehead, it's really light, and that's going to be my light on light edge. And then there's plenty of dark on light edges, dark bunny against light of the paper. Okay, and here I'm splashing just to give this some creative energy. I feel as artists, we try to capture things that are unseen by the naked eye. So I like splashes. I feel like they capture the energy of the animal, and they tell the story of the animal, which is always in motion and a beautiful, just alive energy. And that's why I like splashes. Here, I'm gonna make a oopsies. I used too big of a brush with too much water in it to paint these whiskers, and I end up not liking them. I think they're too clunky. So I'm gonna take clear water. See, I'm jamming my brush, I'm mad. And I'm gonna put some, while they're still wet, I'm gonna put a bunch of water over them and scrub at them. But look how staining this lamp black is. Sometimes I forget how staining lamp black can be, but if you scrub them out, they really soften and leave just a hint of whiskers, which is much more delicate and appropriate for bunny whiskers. So I'm a lot happier with that. Now I've got all this wet since I was doing that. So I'm gonna float in some ultramarine blue, so I create that dark background against light bunny edge along his backside. And I just love that effect. And notice how I left little slivers of white paper along the edge of some of his face and ear to tell the story of that edge. And I just love how that looks. I'm gonna charge in more cream consistency, French ultramarine, while this is still wet, into this important corner, because I like the negative space of that V created by the back side of the bunny and his nose, and that's an important spot, so I wanted more contrast there. And I love to do this too with my finger to make edges more organic looking by dabbing at them like this when they're still wet. Y'all, look how much you're learning just from one little 12-minute tutorial. Can you imagine how much you would learn in my Patreon tutorials? This is how my Patreon tutorials are. I jam-pack them with so much information. All right, cleaning out my brush. I love that shirt, that toile shirt. It's so cute.
All right, let's try to do the eye.
All right, burnt sienna. Now I'm going to do the eye. I'm going to hold my mouth right, and you want to make sure that you don't have too much water in the heel of your brush here, because if you do and you paint this tiny little eye area, you'll get like a blob coming out the end of your brush. So if you're painting this bunny as tiny as I did, then be sure to dab out the heel of your brush and then pick up just on your tip some milk consistency burnt sienna or whatever color you decide to make the eye. And I'm going to paint carefully around the eye glint. Normally I use masking on the eye glint, but this was just a quick study. I was just playing. I didn't mess with putting any masking anywhere. So I just paint very slowly and carefully and look at the reference and paint the shapes that you see, not the shapes you think you see. And one of the shapes created is kind of a triangle of white highlight with a rounded edge on the top for the highlight. So you have to paint around that. So I'm just going real slow. And you might want to use a smaller brush than this 6 round. A size 1 would probably be much more comfortable. I almost got this too puddling. And I'm leaving some white eyeliner. I like to have extra details around the eye area, so I leave these little millimeter wide eyeliners if I can, either white or black, to tell the viewer, hey, this is an important place. And I look at all the little details carefully in my reference. I study my reference. I let it tell me what to do. And this bunny has an interesting little black eyelash. It's not an eyelash, but it's like a fur curvature of eyeliner that goes off like a cat eye. So I wanted to make sure to get that because I think that's a beautiful detail. And I'm painting this pupil on damp paper with very cream consistency paint. But if you're more of a beginner, let your paper dry and then paint on the black pupil, because you run the risk of it blooming just a little too much and you'll lose the eye. So you might want to let your eye completely dry. When I was painting this, I didn't think the world was going to see it, but it came out so great, I'm sharing it. So I wasn't being perfect with my watercolor techniques here. And here, while it's still damp on one edge, because that inner eye is wet, I'm putting in some eyeliner. And I like to paint eyeliner cream consistency on damp paper because it makes the eyeliner soft and not like a cutout or pasted on looking, but it holds its shape. But again, if you have less experience with watercolor, you might want to let everything completely dry and then go in with a tiny little brush and put in some eyeliner. But eyeliner is very important. So look, I have 2 eyeliners. I have that white eyeliner the reference gave me, and I have super thin black eyeliner on the inside of the eye. And now I'm redarkening that nostril and trying to get delicate little black whiskers. I would probably say, unless you have great muscle memory, maybe use an archival art pen, like a micron pen for these whiskers. I think they got a little too thick. And then I'm just putting a little dry brush fur details here and there. You don't want to overdo it. This stage of the painting is considered finishing time, where you're putting on the jewelry. I made a whole video about jewelry. If I can link it here, I will. That's a very important concept. If you're even an intermediate student, knowing about the idea of jewelry is so important. So click on that link I'll put here. It won't take you out of this video. And so I'm just perfecting my edges a little bit and just putting the refining touch here and there, and trying not to overdo it. You don't want to overwork at this stage when you have everything in. I've got my lights, mediums, and darks. I've got my Rembrandt edges. The left side of the painting, the bunny's right, is that dark on dark edge, even though the background's not that dark back there, but it is a dark on medium edge at least, and that will do. I've got my light on light edge on the forehead, light of the bunny on the light background. I've got dark on light on the tushy area. So I've got my Rembrandt windmill edges in. So, and notice another thing about this painting is it's not dabbed. It's big blocks of color. It's bold. And the more bold you can get by looking at the big shapes, paint the big shapes instead of little dabby details, except a few in the area of interest, that will set you up for success too. If you enjoyed this, you will enjoy my Patreon because I have a bunch of bunnies over there, lots of cats, a few dogs, a few landscapes, a couple flowers, lots of good stuff. So come support me there, and I appreciate it so much. Join for a year and get 2 months free. Come join my Facebook group. Like this video if you enjoyed it. If you don't do any of that, at the very least, please come leave me a comment that tells the algorithm you enjoyed this tutorial, and I love to hear from you. If you ask me any question, I am very happy to answer it in the comments, so please do that. And I sure enjoyed our time together, and I look forward to next week when I'll have another video for you. So subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Don't subscribe if you didn't. And now go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.